Alrighty guys, thanks for showing up to an Axiom Aviation, our free private pilot webinar today. Before we get started here, it looks like we're right on time. It's 5 o'clock exactly. So as we get going here, I just want to make sure everybody knows how to use the webinar software correctly, just so if you guys have any questions, we can get those questions answered for you. So in really the only part of the webinar software that you guys will have to be using is just the bottom, really the bottom right corner where you can type in chat stuff. So I just wanted to make sure that works. If everybody could just type in hello or hi into that chat, and just so I can make sure that I can see your questions if you guys have any questions as we go along here. All right, perfect. Thank you, Pamela. Can everybody else just go ahead and kind of type a hello into that bottom box? I just want to make sure that that whatever questions you guys have, that I'm rather than just bulldozing through our presentation here. So, and can everybody hear me good? If you can't hear me good, just type something into the chat and tell me to move the mic a little closer to my mouth so you can hear me better. Okay, cool guys. Let's go ahead and get started here. So as we get going, I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself first. And as I'm introducing myself, if you guys don't mind just typing into that chat box, I'd like to know how much flight experience you have already and kind of what your goals are in aviation. So if you're just working on your private pilot license and your goals are to be an airline pilot, or if you're just looking to get your private pilot license, kind of fly around. And type in your little introduction to everybody as I'm introducing myself here. So my name is Nathan Hodell. I'm an owner here at Axiom Aviation Flight School. We're a flight school out of the Ogden, Utah airport. So we're kind of up in northern Utah. I started flight training in 2010. And I got all my flight training done in about 2 years. It took me about 2 years to get through all my private pilot and commercials and CFIs and everything like that. And then I was a flight instructor for about a year and a half, a little less than a year and a half. It was about a year and 3 months before I had my 1,500 hours to the year. So I had with SkyWest Airlines. So I was over at SkyWest Airlines for a little over a year. I was flying at SkyWest Airlines, and then my current business partner now, he kind of talked me into starting a flight school over here with him. So I helped him get this flight school started, and I was just going to kind of do it on the side at first, but then we got really busy, and I kind of enjoyed being home every night. So we're doing this full time now. I've got about 2,500 hours, probably a little over 2,500 hours, and I think I've signed off about 70 private pilot certificates for the FAA. Probably about 70 check rides is how many I've signed off over my time as a flight instructor. So yeah, that's just a little bit about me as we jump into this here. If you guys would like to, you can introduce yourselves and just kind of tell us how much flight time you have and what your goals are in aviation. That'd be fine too. So I'm just going to go ahead and get rolling through the private pilot PTS. And like I said, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to just type them into the chat box here, and I'll stop the presentation and make sure that I can get those questions answered for you. Just because that's really the whole point of this webinar for us today, is we don't want it to be a pre-recorded video that you just you sit at home and watch. We want it to be kind of an interactive experience. So I'll be asking you guys questions as we go throughout the presentation, and feel free to ask me questions too. That way, I mean, because with the pre-recorded videos, you can't really get your questions answered, and if it's going, if they're teaching everything too fast, then you're not catching it, or they might be skipping things that you might not understand fully. So that's why we wanted to create a webinar experience rather than just a pre-recorded video. So please ask any questions that you have as we go through this here. We're just going to be doing the private pilot PTS today. So every once in a while we'll get people that really want to show how smart they are. They're the whiz kids in aviation, and they like to start asking really advanced kind of turbine turbine questions, airline questions, and kind of getting off topic a little bit. We will be creating a webinar for those advanced topics, but for today we're just going to be sticking with, you know, the basic private pilot stuff. So if you do have advanced questions, I'll give you my email address after, and we'll be able to communicate via email, and I can keep you posted for when our advanced classes start coming out. But for now, we're just going to keep it basic with the private pilot PTS. So as we get started here, the private pilot PTS, I'm going to start pretty basic just so we're all on the same page here and we all understand, you know, the different acronyms and stuff that we're talking about as we go through this here. So private pilot PTS. PTS stands for Practical Test Standards. Okay, so the private pilot PTS is the private pilot's kind of the standards that you have to be able to perform to in order for the FAA to sign you off on a license. So in the private, it's going to list things that you need to know, you need to understand, whether it be on the ground or all the things you need to understand to pass your check ride. So it's kind of like an outline of the things you should study and really know well. That way when the check ride examiner shows up to give you the check ride, you know, you kind of know what to expect when he shows up. So the very first section of the private pilot PTS is emphasis areas. So these things are areas that the check ride examiner is definitely going to ask you about on your check ride. They're not necessarily going to come out and just say, all right, tell me what land and hold short operation is, or tell me what CFIT stands for. With these special emphasis areas, it's more along the lines of they're going to put you in certain scenarios, you know, that they create in their minds. They'll create a scenario for you on the check ride, and they just want to make sure that you understand these different principles like CFIT and spins and collision avoidance and all that stuff. So it's not like you really shouldn't expect them to just come out and say, okay, what's a TFR? It's not really going to be like that. They'll probably put you on, you know, like a flight plan route that you're flying or something, and see if you really understand how TFRs work. So that's what we're going to run through today. We're going to let special emphasis areas, and then if we get through this and we still have quite a bit of time, then we will continue on and talk about airspace, because it seems like airspace is one of the most complicated things for private pilots to understand. So here special emphasis areas, and this is into it. Our first special emphasis area is positive aircraft control. So positive aircraft control, pretty simply, just means that you consistently maintain appropriate control of the aircraft. So for instance, on your check, the check ride examiner is not really going to say, tell me about positive aircraft control. He's just, when you're to maintain control the whole time you're on the check ride with him, kind of thing. So that's kind of like another scenario built thing, but this one you'll actually probably just be doing in the plane with him. So positive aircraft control means consistently maintaining appropriate control of the aircraft, regardless of the phase of flight or potential distraction of other tasks. So a lot of people have probably heard this before. If you haven't, this is so this is kind of how we prioritize our tasks while we're up flying in the air. The most important thing that we have to do as pilots is fly the airplane to keep it flying in a nice, stable condition. The second most important thing is to navigate, so to keep ourselves away from buildings, terrain, other that. The most important thing of these three is to communicate. Especially with new pilots, they feel like communicating needs to be first. A lot of new pilots are kind of nervous about flight training, and they're especially nervous about talking on the radios with ATC and stuff. And so they feel like they need to make communicate their top priority, and you really don't. ATC, the air traffic control centers, are it's not the other way around. Pilots aren't here to help ATC. So what you need to do is you need to prioritize your flying tasks into flying the airplane, then navigating away from terrain and other planes. Lastly is communicating. There were a lot of times, even when I was at Sky West, where if we were really busy trying to get ready for an event, usually gets really busy at O'Hare Airport. But if we'd be getting really busy, we're aviating and we're navigating, and then ATC would come on and say something, we wouldn't necessarily just jump right on the radio and answer, the call from ATC. We would finish doing what we were doing. We would make sure that the airplane was in a safe state, in a safe attitude, and then when we had time, we'd go ahead and call up ATC and tell them, respond to them. And a lot of times we just tell them, hey, you know what, sorry, we were busy doing a lot of other stuff, but yeah, we'll comply with whatever you want us to comply with. So just remember, always fly the airplane. Very, very rarely will you experience, major accidents if your top focus is keeping the airplane flying safely through the air. If you can do that, then you'll have a long, healthy aviation career. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. Next slide is about positive exchange of the flight controls. So this is the correct way that we should transfer controls of the aircraft from one pilot to another. Okay. So the pilot flying will say to the pilot not flying, your controls. All right. Then the pilot not flying flying will then again repeat and reconfirm with your controls. So the reason we do this is we just really want to make sure that we know who is flying the airplane, that there's never a confusion with who is in control of the airplane and who's, accomplishing other tasks. So on your check ride, what's going to happen for sure is the check ride examiner will definitely at some point in the check ride take the controls from you and then end up giving them back to you. But he wants to see you go through the positive exchange of flight controls the correct way. So the correct way to say it is your controls, my controls, your controls. So it's a three-peat. You say it 3 times to really make sure that we know which pilot is flying the airplane. So that's a pretty easy task, but sometimes students will mess that up because they're really nervous for their check ride. So just focusing and doing everything very safe. So your controls, my controls, and your controls. Okay. Next special emphasis area is the stall spin awareness. So a lot of us know about stalls, so I'm going to focus mostly on spins for this slide here, because spins are a thing that you don't really do as a private pilot. You don't necessarily have to go out and do spins, but you do need to know what causes a spin and how to get out of a spin. So what we're going to do is I'm actually going to play this short video clip here of me explaining how spins to the slide. Will answer any of your questions and talk more on the slide. So let's go ahead and watch this video. All right, guys, welcome back to the next aviation short. Let's start with what is a spin. Start with the very basics. So the spin is a type of stall that causes an aircraft to descend and spin along its vertical axis. So essentially what it is both wings are stalled, the airplane pitches down, that is just a little arrow. So as we move on, what causes a spin? So we know what it is. Now so spin is caused by an uncoordinated. So we're same page here. If we look at our picture, we can see on the plane on the left, ball is centered, and the 2 planes on the right, the ball for the rudder is not centered as it should be in the cage. So that would cause an uncoordinated stall, which could end in a spin. So if we're uncoordinated, when we do a stall, then we are likely to enter a spin. And these are the 2 times that we're most likely to enter an inadvertent spin. So the first is during slow flight, and the second is during power on stalls. Slow flight and power on stalls. And we can talk about why this is. So typically during slow flight and power on stalls, the airplane is going to be pitched into a very high nose up attitude while we're doing both these maneuvers. And we have a lot of power input. So since the airplane's nose is so high, it calls for a lot of rudder input. So a lot of times students won't put enough input, or they'll put in way too much rudder, making the airplane uncoordinated. So it's really pretty simple. If you want to avoid a spin, all you've got to do is stay coordinated. Just keep that ball centered throughout the entire maneuver. Make sure you're using just enough rudder to stay centered. So let's talk about what happens if we don't stay coordinated. If we let that rudder ball get outside of the cage while we're doing a stall, what will happen, or how we can recover from a spin, is we'll use the acronym PAIR. So PAIR stands for the P, idle. So as the spin starts, we'll pull our power back to idle. The A stands for ailerons neutral. We'll make sure that we're not banged one way or the other. We'll bring our ailerons to neutral. And for the R, it's opposite rudder. So if we're spinning to the right, we're going to use full left rudder to stop the spin. Then E is elevator forward and then back. Elevator forward first to break the stall, because the airplane will still be in a stalled condition. And we'll smoothly pull the elevator back to pull out of that stall nice and smooth. For the spin nice and smooth, we'll be able to return. So alrighty, cool. So there's our spin video. Now we're going to come back to here and we're going to talk more about spins, about how they work. So like the video said, a spin is an uncoordinated stall. So to know if you're coordinated or not, you have to look at the turn coordinator. That's the instrument with the airplane in it and then the ball and the cage. So being coordinated means in the cage at all times. So if you're ever uncoordinated, it means that the ball has gone either too far left or too far right and is no longer in the cage there. So if you're ever doing a stall of some sort and it's an uncoordinated stall, so the ball is not centered in the cage throughout the stall, then you can enter what's called a spin. As you saw that, it's kind of the aircraft enters kind of a spinning, diving movement towards the ground. So just real quick, because you definitely will get asked this on your check ride, for sure. I think I've been asked this on almost every single check ride I've ever had. Is how to, so to avoid it, we just stay coordinated. To recover, we have to use the acronym PAIR. This is the best way to recover, okay? So the P stands for power idle. So once we start to head into that spin, we're going to pull our power back to idle. The A is ailerons neutral, so you're going to go ahead and neutralize your ailerons. The R is rudder, full opposite direction of the spin. So if we're spinning right, we're going to give it full left rudder to stop the spinning movement. Then the E is elevator forward then back. So you're actually going to push forward on the yoke. It's going to feel kind of weird because it's going to feel like you're sort of in a dive, but you do still need to push forward on nice full recover from a spin. So like I said, you're probably not going to actually do a spin before your private pilot check ride. You might, and if you do, you know, all the better for you. But you might not, and that's okay. Just as long as you know what causes it and then how to get out of it if you end up getting into one. Now, trainer airplanes like Cessna 172s, that's what I did a lot of my spin training in. They're very stable airplanes, and so getting out of spins in those airplanes is actually fairly easy. But once you start, we do want to train you so that once you start flying, you know, bigger, faster airplanes that aren't as stable, that you can still get out of the spin using the PAIR acronym, okay? If there's no questions on spins, then we'll go ahead and collision avoidance. So collision avoidance is pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. So is avoidance, right? We're avoiding a collision with a different airplane. And so during the day, as we're out there flying, how are we going to avoid other airplanes? There's a lot of different ways. So what I've listed here is just a couple of ways that you can avoid other airplanes, you know, a couple of good pointers. But there's thousands of, you know, good ways to avoid other airplanes. But let's just talk about these ones. So first thing we want to do is always keep our head on a swivel. We want to be very vigilant in looking for traffic, okay? This usually isn't too big of a problem with brand new students, because brand new students do like to look outside of the window and, you know, have a good time flying. The longer you're a pilot, it seems like the harder it is to kind of take your head out of the cockpit and look around. You know, everybody starts to get really excited about the instruments and how they look and how they work, and everybody's nervous about holding altitude perfect and headings perfect and everything like that. and they forget to look outside of the airplane and look for other airplanes to avoid them. So just make sure always throughout your training that you're being very vigilant and looking for other traffic and staying safe. The second thing is to make accurate and frequent radio calls and to listen to the radio calls of other pilots. So this is important, especially in busy airspace, that you are making good what altitude can avoid you. And then you also just want to, be aware of your surroundings. So listen to other people's radio calls, know where they're at, where they're heading, and what altitude they're at too, so that you can avoid running into them. The next thing is to always get clarification from ATC, from air traffic control, if you're set. So students that will get an instruction from ATC and they won't necessarily understand fully what ATC said, and yet they'll still try to comply with it. So that can kind of get dangerous if you don't understand what they said and you're doing something that they don't want you to do. So if you're ever unsure, like I said before, ATC is here to help pilots. If you're ever unsure of what ATC said, just call them up on the radio and say, hey, can you repeat that, that last transmission for, whatever your tail number is. But yeah, just don't guess on what ATC wants you to do. If you're not sure, then just ask them, and they'll be more than willing to help you. The last one I have on here is in busy airspace, like training areas, Victor Airways. You always want to try and get flight following if you're able. Now, flight following is a service, it's something that air traffic control has to do. ATC can do flight following if they have extra time, but if they don't, if they're really busy with a lot of other instrument IFR traffic and stuff, then they won't. They'll just tell you, that they're not able. But what flight following does is if from a tower and they can actually help keep you away from other aircraft. So they can tell you, there's traffic at same altitude, we need you to turn left immediately, kind of. And then that way it just adds another level of safety. So you're out there looking for planes, and the ATC is also out there watching your back. So if you're ever able, just so pretty much at night you want to do the same things you do during the day, except for you also want to turn on all your lights. Not, you can always flash the landing light. That's kind of a good practice. So if another airplane's kind of coming close to you and you're not sure if he can see you at night, you can kind of flash the landing light to try and catch his attention so that he ends up, seeing you and being able to avoid you. So honestly, at night, I don't know how many of you guys have flown at night, but flying at night is not too difficult to see other airplanes. It's a lot more difficult during the day. Just at night, you can usually see the lights against, the black sky and stuff. So it's usually a little bit easier at night, but still, you don't want to get complacent. You always want to be looking for traffic all the time. So that's collision avoidance, pretty basic. Everything really on this PowerPoint slides, on these PowerPoint slides here, are pretty basic. We'll get into some technical stuff, but for instance, like this one's a little bit more technical. So let's talk about wake turbulence avoidance. All right. So who creates wake turbulence? Everybody, all aircraft create wake turbulence. It's a byproduct of it's just like a boat on a lake, but whether you're a boat, a cruise ship, or a jet ski, you're going to be creating a wake, as you go around in the water. So everybody creates wake turbulence, and wake turbulence is usually greatest when airplanes are heavy, clean, and slow. So the heavier, the cleaner, and the slower the airplane is, they're going to create essentially a larger wake as they go. So during takeoff, airplanes will create very, very large wakes because they're heavy, they're full of fuel and people. Clean means to have your gear and your flaps up. Sorry, I should have explained that earlier, but a clean airplane is an airplane that, you can think of it like as it looks clean. So it's got they've put their landing gear up and stowed it, and they've got their flaps up and they have them stowed. So that's what clean means. So airplanes that are heavy, clean, and slow are on takeoff, and they create create the greatest wake there. But also airplanes coming in on landing because they're pretty slow as well. Coming into land, and you don't want to wake coming into land. You know, if you're coming 72 behind a very big aircraft, you don't want to make 20 feet above the ground. So we're going to talk about some ways that we can wake. And we should avoid wake turbulences so that we can maintain positive aircraft control. Wake turbulence has been known to create very strong pitch and roll upsets that has crashed airplanes before. When you get into that wake, and I'm going to show you a video here in just a second, you can see what the wakes look like. But if you're flying a small airplane into a big wake, it can really roll you right over, upside down real quick, and make a sticky situation, you know, real bad really quick. So let's go ahead and look at this YouTube video here. So the wake coming back of an aircraft, coming off the back of a jet. This video, I'll just tell you kind of as it's loading here. What you're going to see in this video is you're going to see that wake turbulence moves out, down, and away from the aircraft producing it, from the aircraft's wing. So I'm going to go ahead and make this full screen so everybody can see it better. So the plane just came in and landed, and you're going to see it takes it a couple seconds here to develop, but you'll start to see the really strong wake turbulence. Cool, so you can really see that swirling fog there. That's the wake turbulence from that 737 that just landed on that runway. So you can see how that would pose a huge problem for a small, you know, Cessna 172 or something like that coming in to land on this runway right behind this guy. That could cause a really strong roll upset, which could end in a crash or something undesirable. So that's what wake turbulence looks like. And now that we know how it moves, we're going to talk about how we can avoid it. So to avoid, we need to first know how it moves. So like I said before, wake turbulence moves, if you look up here on the top right side is where we're at. Wake turbulence moves out, down, and away. This means that there are different tactics that we can use to avoid it. So it starts at the wingtips. It moves out, down, and away from the aircraft that are producing that wake turbulence. So the way we can avoid it is during takeoff, we want to rotate and lift off before the airplane ahead of us did and try and stay above his wake. So say a 737, whatever, takes off ahead of us on the runway, and we pull up in our Cessna 172. Well, it's our goal to take off, to rotate and lift off of the runway before he did. That way we can stay above his wake that's sinking down to the ground. Now, we'll be able to do that just fine. We'll be able to take off before him just fine in a Cessna 172, but it's going to be very difficult for us to outclimb him because jets climb a lot faster than, you know, little Cessnas. So let's jump down here to the climb section. We'll talk about what we can do if we're going to try and because we can't outclimb his wake. He's going to be climbing a lot faster than us, and if we just keep flying straight, we'll eventually run into his wake, and that would not be a good situation. So if we're unable to outclimb the preceding aircraft's wake, then it's best to offset your climb to one side or flight path. 730, he's creating a wake behind him. We can either sidestep left or right to get out of the way of his wake, or even different direction or something like that. But yeah, you will want to try and turn to get out of the wake of the preceding aircraft's flight path. And it kind of depends. A lot of people ask me, well, should I go right? Should I go left? It kind of depends. What I would suggest is if you're taking off that runway and there's maybe a right crosswind on the runway, then the wind would be blowing all the wake turbulence, all the wakes left of the runway. So you'd probably want to sidestep to the right so you're not flying right in it. So I usually tell my students, if you're taking off, you can't outclimb it, to turn into wind if you've got a crosswind, and that'll help you kind of stay away from the wake. So That's how we avoid it on takeoff. Let's talk about landing. So we're coming into land. 737 lands ahead of us, and we're going to come in behind him and land. What we want to do is we want to land at a further point down the runway than he did. So we'll say that he came in and landed on the 1,000 footers. We'll say he landed right on his mark on the 1,000 footers. We'd want to stay above his flight path all the way to the runway, and we would want to touch down beyond the 1,000 footers. That way we would stay above and out of his wake the entire time. Now in cruise, there's not like a ton to avoid wake. You can try and attempt to cruise above the preceding aircraft's flight path, just so his wake is kind of sinking down below you. But really, ATC will take care of that for the most part. If you're on an IFR flight plan or something like that, then they'll keep you a good distance from the preceding aircraft, so that you don't have to worry about flying around in his wake the whole time you're flying. So that is how we avoid wake turbulence. This is definitely important. They will ask you this on the check ride. And what they want to see is they want to see that the proper takeoff to avoid wake turbulence and the proper way to land to avoid wake turbulence. Those are kind of the two big things they're looking for. And in order to know that, you have to know how wakes move. So just remember, wake turbulence moves out, down, and away from the aircraft producing it. Okay, let's move on. So LASSO stands for land and hold short operations. So in other words, you're coming into land at a runway to an airport where two runways cross each other. Okay. And sometimes ATC will need you, or tower will need you, to land on a certain runway, stop before the crossing runway. That way you're not hitting an airplane, taking off or landing on that crossing runway. So it's coming into land and holding short of that crossing runway. That's what a land and hold short operation is. Okay. So let's talk about it. Do you have, as the pilot in command, do you have to accept a land and hold short clearance? And the answer is no. Okay. It's completely up to the pilot in command if he can safely do the land and hold short clearance. If he can't, then he just okay. So and they say, Skyhawk 736 Tango Bravo, we need you to land runway 21 and hold short of 16 or something. I'm just kind of making this up, but we'll say they said land short of 21, hold short of 16. Okay. If I don't think my airplane can do that, if I don't think that's enough runway for me to get down on the ground and stop, tailwind, or if I just don't want to do it that day, then all I've got to say to ATC is unable. Okay. As soon as you say unable, ATC will come back and give you some further instructions. They might say, all right, we need you to, give us a right turn. We'll bring you back to the airport in a second. Once we're on the cross, whatever. They will give you further instructions. Okay. However, if you decide that you're going to accept the land and hold short clearance, so ATC says, Skyhawk 736 Tango Bravo, you're cleared to land 21, hold short of 16, then I accept it, saying, Roger, we're cleared to land 21, hold short of 16, then I have to adhere to it. Okay. There's no changing your mind after you accept it. So if you accept that clearance, you're essentially telling tower that you can land on that runway and come to a stop before the crossing runway, and that you will do it. Not only that you can do it, but that you will do it. So if you accept that clearance, you have to adhere to it. You can't just land and say, oh, hey, sorry, I forgot, or, hey, I figured I didn't want to this time. You have to do it. If you don't, you'll be either dead because you hit another airplane, or you'll be in a lot of trouble and they'll be coming to take your licenses. So the biggest thing to know about land and hold short operations is to do them clearance, then you have to. Okay, but you don't necessarily have to accept the clearance if you don't want to. If you don't want to, like I said before, just say, we're unable. We can't do that. And they'll be totally okay with that. Okay. All right, we're going to move on to runway incursion avoidance. So runway incursion avoidance is when proper spacing is not maintained between aircraft on runways or taxiways. So it's pretty much like you just got too close to another airplane, or another airplane got too close to you, whatever the situation is. Maybe you were taxiing around and you were putting in your flight plan into your GPS, instead of looking out the window and you didn't see an airplane taxi right out ahead of you or something like that, and you got too close to him. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean a runway incursion avoidance doesn't necessarily mean that you hit another airplane. You got essentially too close for comfort. Okay, it was like a close call. We want to avoid these. So the best way to avoid it is to just be aware of your surroundings, video, and know where other airplanes are on the airport. And obviously have your head on a swivel, be looking around, and make sure that you're not going to run into one of these guys or get too close to them, to cause runway incursion avoidance. So I've got another video here. Got a lot of YouTube videos for this presentation today. So here's another video. We're going to see exactly what a runway incursion avoidance looks like. Okay. So this is a scary situation, but it obviously happened. So here we go. All right, head up. I'm going to pause it. Time I was paying attention, I should have been. But the airplane that was crossing the runway right in front of this airplane landing. So I want to play it again from this point and just watch off the left-hand side of the screen here. Got runway recap. Alrighty, so that is definitely a runway incursion avoidance. We said it wasn't a wreck, like the two airplanes didn't hit each other, but they did get too close for comfort, and that is that would definitely be considered an avoidance. The pilot that was landing actually did a fantastic job. I mean, he did the only thing he could. He gave up and did what's called a go around to avoid hitting, but obviously he was caught it, planned together, whatever. And that's where you can see bad things could happen very quickly if you're not really paying attention to what's going on while you're taxiing around on the airport. So just always pay attention. Like I said, a lot of these slides here are common sense, but you'd be amazed at how many people still mess this kind of stuff up. So you just want to really be vigilant the whole time you're in an airplane, whenever you're flying. Okay. The next one we have is CFIT. CFIT stands for Controlled Flight into Terrain. Controlled flight into terrain. So what this means is that essentially there was nothing wrong with the pilot. The pilot was, he didn't have get something in his eye. Pilot healthy. And still runs out. Everything's working great. There's no mechanical failures or anything, but how do we avoid CFIT? You always just want the pilot to perform proper pre-flight pilots in the planning. So you want to know the elevation of all the terrain around you in your area. You always want to have pre-planned emergency escape there. If something happens on takeoff from this is what I'm going to do so I don't run into the mountains. Maybe even closer to the airport than 4 miles. Here, 4,000 feet, and they're up there at 11, 12,000 feet, so they're 8,000 feet above us. So I know that when I'm taking off. I know that, okay, if I actually go into some clouds or some low visibility situation or something, turn to the east. Because if I turn to the east, I'm going to be hitting right for massive mountains. Some other things to ask ATC. or sorry, if you're not sure of what they said. So if you think ATC is turning you to run you into a mountain, okay, better than I do. If you're not sure, if it doesn't seem right what ATC is asking you to do, then ask them. Say, are you sure? You know, ATC has told me something to do, you know, make a right turn or left turn. And I'm thinking, okay, turn, because, you know, you'll put me pointing right at this other airplane if I make a left turn. So I'd call them up and I'd ask them, can you repeat that? Do you really want me to make a left turn? And they come back and they say, you know, no, sorry, we need something. Or if it seems like they're going to run you into a mountain or something, just call them up and ask them for clarification. Okay. Last thing is, don't fly into low visibility conditions when around terrain or otherwise. Okay. If you want to be flying, then keep training. But if you don't, if you want your private license, then just make sure low visibility flying clouds or when you don't know where terrain is. Okay. Not to mention that it's also illegal to fly in clouds if you're just a private pilot. So the last one, last bullet, we're going to talk about, or we're going to watch a video on CFIT too. So this is a pretty crazy video. This video kind of made me a little nervous. So I'm going to show you this video. Happens in a Bonanza. I think they're flying in an A36 Bonanza, and they get really close to not making it home. So go ahead and watch this video. Sorry, get my computer to load here a little bit quicker. It doesn't look like it wants to load, so I'm going to go ahead. All right, this is what we're going to do. Sorry about that. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and pause this. I'm going to go ahead and let it load. Go on with some of the other PowerPoints to the CFIT video once we finish a couple more slides here. So we'll move on to ADM and risk management. Okay. ADM stands for aeronautical decision making. It means to make good, safe decisions. That's what it means. I mean, so what I'm going to do is with all these PowerPoints, I'm going to emailing them all out to you guys, to email these PowerPoints out to you guys, so that you can study them. You know, like all these different links here. You can watch all the videos again if you want. And so on this here, you can read more about decision making. I'm not really all that honest to tell pilots to make good decisions. I feel like people should just make good, safe decisions. But regardless, so ADM If you read more on it, you can right here. When I send the email, you can read more on aeronautical decision making. And also risk management, kind of the same thing. So we want to be flying, and the best way to do this, fly the biggest risk, is to not keep your plane in the sky. Okay, that's our biggest risk. And then, like we talked about before, also to aviate, navigate, then communicate. Aviate first, navigate away from terrain, communicate is the last thing that we do. All right, the biggest threats to life and property come from not making flying the airplane your very top priority. You have an engine failure and you're heading for the ground. The most important thing is not to tell ATC that you had an engine failure. The most important thing is to try and milk as much of a glide out of that airplane as you can. Okay, but it's not to go tell ATC what's happening. It's to fly the airplane. All right. And then also on this slide here, if you wanted to read a little bit more on risk management, you can go ahead and click that link when I end up sending these PowerPoints to you. All right, next thing is wire strike avoidance. I honestly don't know what else to say on this one. I mean, I've tried to rack my brain to come up with things I could say about wire strike. I'm left with if you fly too low, sorry. Okay, there's everywhere. There's power lines. You know, we live in 2016, so there's power lines and stuff all over the place. While it is cool to fly low over the ground, you know, if you're flying too low and you're not paying attention, you know, or you're over a congested area, which is illegal if you're flying too low, you're going to hit a wire, okay? You're loss of life and limb, so just don't fly too low and you won't hit wires. Don't really know what else to say about that one. Okay, the next thing is checklist usage. So how do we use checklists? Now, for those of you that have flyation until you land and you're done following checklists. So we want to know how to use them efficiently, okay? You always want to use a checklist. All right, I've got probably 1,200, maybe more hours. No, I probably got about 1,000 to 1,200 hours in Cessna 172s. I still will get in the Cessna and I will pull out a checklist and read through the checklist. I do it every time, okay? You want to do the same thing. You want to always use a checklist. Because what happens is, you know, you'll start to think, okay, I've got it. I can do this. You know, I've flown a Cessna 172 for 1,000 hours or whatever. I've got this. And then there'll just be that one day that you forget that one little checklist item and you are no longer, you know, something dangerous or scary happens. So just always use a checklist, okay? Some checklists are read and do, like I put on the slide here. Read and do means that you read the item on the checklist and then you do it right after you read it. So if you're looking at the checklist and it says turn the battery master switch on, you will reach over, you'll read it first, battery master switch on, you'll reach over and turn the battery master switch on. Okay. Now, read and do checklists are typically do these when you're on the ground. Okay, you're taxiing around the ground, you're starting up the engine, you're shutting it down, you're doing your run up, stuff like that. You do read and do checklists. Now, other checklists are due. Okay, that means what you do, and these ones are usually in flight. So, like the after takeoff and cruise. So, what you do is you take off. When you're in the air, you're gonna check a checklist, right? They're usually not very long, but you're gonna memorize these checklists. You're gonna do them, and then when you're done doing them from memory, you're gonna pull out your checklist and make sure you didn't forget anything. So reads and do's then reads are typically in the air. Okay. All right, and just remember, always use a checklist. The last thing you want to do on your check ride is hop in your plane with the check ride examiner and not open a checklist and just start doing stuff. I mean, that'll end the check ride right there. It'll be real short, and you'll be paying $500, $700 to come back and help you do it again. So it's a really dumb mistake. So just make sure throughout your whole career you're always using a checklist of some sort. Okay. The next one is TFRs. TFRs are temporary flight restrictions. Temporary flight restrictions, ATC just says, hey, we're going to restrict this area. And it could be for anything. So this airspace right here, planes cannot fly for today. And that can include these different bullet points I put on here, like a person of importance. Obama is coming to town, and so nobody's landing at the airport Obama just landed at. So they kind of block off that area and keep it safe. Another popular one, especially out here in Utah in the summer, is firefighting. So we'll get a lot of fires and forest fires and stuff, and they'll actually block off those areas so that the firefighting are having to worry about little Cessna 172s putting around. They can just focus in the water where it needs to go and the sand where it needs to go and stuff. And there's a couple other ones. NASA rocket launches. Disneyland, I think, has got one over it every night. Fireworks shows. The Super Bowl this last week, so people were putting around over the Super Bowl. So a lot of different stuff like that is why they use TFRs. Okay. So you just want to make sure that you check for TFRs during your pre-flight planning. So before you take off, you don't want to be trying to figure these things out in the air, because if you take off and you're not paying attention and you accidentally fly, say for instance you accidentally go putting into Obama's TFR, you're not going to have a happy ending to the rest. Probably spend the night in jail and questioning and all kinds of stuff. So you just always want to make sure that you're checking your TFRs. Not only will you get in trouble by people on the ground, but they can also come and take your pilot licenses and stuff like that if it's something really bad. Okay, so check for TFRs before you take off. All right, next, aviation security. So this is pretty straightforward. If you're at your local airport and you're pre-flighting or something, and you see somebody acting weird on the airport, just call the right authorities, whether that be the police or you're calling airport security, or you're calling the airport manager, whoever it is. It is everybody's responsibility to keep the airport safe. So if you see somebody acting weird, then keep aviation safe for everyone. Alrighty, here we are on to our last slide for PTS special emphasis areas. SRM. SRM stands for Single Pilot Resource Management. And it's essentially exactly how it sounds, okay? So when you're flying all by yourself, you're a single pilot crew. You're the only person in that airplane that knows how to fly an airplane, okay? What SRM talks about is all the resources that are available to you, even when you're flying all by yourself, okay? There's a lot of different stuff that I think people don't always realize, all the different things, all the different resources that are available to them. So the first bullet point I have on here is your knowledge of flying. So obviously, all the stuff you've studied on the ground, all the experience that you have. The pilot operating handbook. So that's the book that should be in the plane at all times. It says how the systems work. It says it has the emergency checklist in it, all that kind of stuff. Okay. Use the pilot operating handbook if you ever have a problem. Other pilots on your same radio frequency, this could simply be asking them for help. If you're lost or something, you can ask them to see if they can, point you in the right direction. ATC, obviously, asks for help. Even a phone call to an instructor or mechanic. Now, a lot of people will see this and be like, "Holy cow! I don't really think I'm supposed to pull myself." I would say definitely do it over crashing the airplane or making a bad decision, right? Pull out your cell phone and make a phone call. Nobody's going to get mad at you. You're not going to get in trouble. Nothing like that's going to happen. Before I started doing my last flight as an interview to get a job at my old flight school. And so we're supposed to be doing a few landings. We're doing landings in a Piper Seminole. And the examiner, or the chief pilot at the company, just wanted to see that I could pretty good and send me off and I'd have the job to go. So this was the last thing I had to do before I got the job as a flight instructor. So we're doing landings at this airport. Well, we've actually only done one landing so far. So we do a landing. It's okay, it's an okay landing. We take it back off and we're coming back around to do another landing. and the landing gear down position, so the wheels will come down, and nothing happens. And so I'm looking at the chief flight. He turns to me and says, "All right, go ahead and try it again." So I put the landing gear handle up, and then I put it back down again. Nothing happens. So he calls. So he tells me, he says, "Hey, look over there. There's a circuit breaker popped out." So I look over at the circuit breaker panel, and sure enough, the landing gear circuit breaker had popped out. He says, "All right, this is going to be our last landing, so go ahead and reset that circuit breaker and let's try it again." So I say, "Okay." So I push the circuit breaker back in. This time he reaches over, he grabs the landing gear lever, he puts it up, he puts it back down. Nothing happens, the circuit breaker pops again. So we're flying around with our gear up, and I'm thinking to myself, holy crap, we're going to be landing this thing, we're going to be bellying this airplane up into the airport here in just a sec with no landing gear. But he did something that's always stuck with me, and I thought was extremely smart. And so I always pass this on to my students. But he told me, he said, call up ATC and get an area where we can go circle around and get this figured out. So I called the tower. They told us, we went west or whatever, and we're just trying to get the landing gear lever figured out. We try a couple different things, and nothing's working. And so this head instructor, he says, "All right, Nate, I just want you to keep flying circles out here, and I'm going to go ahead and call our mechanic." And he pulls his cell phone out of his pocket, and he calls the head mechanic for the company. So he gets the head mechanic for the company on the phone, and they run through some things. It takes them 15 to 20 minutes, whatever. They try a bunch of different things, and nothing works. And so the mechanic ends up saying, "All right, your last ditch effort, this is the last thing you can do, is to pull the emergency gear handle, and the gear should come down." So he says, "Okay." So he reaches over the emergency gear. Luckily, thank heaven, the landing gear came down when we pulled the emergency gear handle. And so we came in, we landed it safely, and everything was, everybody went home to their families and was happy that night. But it was a cool thing for me to see that, he did that, that he pulled out his cell phone and made a call rather than, trying to make weird guesses like pilots sometimes do. He called somebody that knew the situation, got him on the phone, and that person was able to fix the situation for us. Like I said before, nobody got in trouble. The FAA is not coming out, not going to get mad at you for using your cell phone while you're flying in the airplane or anything like that, okay? So if it comes down to that, use a cell phone. Like I said, you can call an instructor, a mechanic, somebody else that I don't know, probably not your wife or your girlfriend or whatever, because you'll probably just stress them out. But call somebody that knows how to help you, okay? And last thing, don't forget ForeFlight. So I know there's a lot of different apps out there. I like to use ForeFlight, so I just say ForeFlight. I think that there's some Garmin apps and stuff like that. But don't forget to use those apps too. On your, whether it's on your iPad, your kneeboard, whatever kind of device you're using, those apps can help a lot, especially when you're in a sticky situation. They can help you, find out where you are, find out how to get help and stuff like that. So never forget to use those. I seriously think that they're amazing. And I suggest to all my students to have, especially my students that are serious about becoming pilots, to really get an app. So one of these different types of apps. They usually have like a yearly subscription, but to get one of these types of apps, because it just makes flying so much safer. So guys, that's everything for the special emphasis areas. Before we head on to the next part, I'm going to go ahead and see if we've got our video. Okay, cool. So here's our near miss with the mountain, okay? Now I don't know if I'm going to be able to replay this video, so I'm going to tell you what kind of happens first so that you can just kind of watch through, okay? You're going to see these guys flying in this Bonanza, and in the bottom right corner of their front window, you'll see some terrain, okay? You'll kind of see them get close to some mountains and some trees, okay? So they accidentally flew into some clouds like they probably shouldn't have, and they get really close to some mountains and some terrain. So just watch in the very bottom right corner of that front windscreen what happens, and I'll just let this video run to the end. Alrighty, guys. So that video was for the CFIT, the controlled flight into terrain, and you saw how close, um, they got to hitting that mountain, and really how lucky they are that they were able to walk away from that. They definitely scraped some trees. They busted out that side light there and scratched and dented up the wing. So they were pretty lucky that they made it through that, to fly another day. So that's why CFIT can be really dangerous. You shouldn't go putting into clouds if you don't know where terrain is or if you don't know what altitude you should be at. So just don't make dumb decisions. That's pretty much what all the special emphasis areas of the PTS are to just not make dumb decisions. Be a smart, safe, competent pilot, and always err on the side of safety, because aviation it's not a dangerous, it's really a dangerous activity, unless you make it dangerous. But it's really easy to make it dangerous if you're not erring on the side of safety. So that's all the special emphasis area stuff. I'm going to give you guys just a minute here. We're going to take a 5-minute break here. No, we'll just take a 3-minute break. We'll wait till 6:05. So we'll take a 3-minute break here. I'm just going to grab a drink of water, and then whatever questions you have, just go ahead and type in the chat box, and I'll get your questions answered. And then we will hop into, let's see, we're going to hop into some airspace stuff. So we'll hop in and talk about the different types of airspace before we call it good for the night. So go ahead and take a 3-minute break. Any questions you have, just go and type them in that box for me, and then I'll be right back with some airspace stuff for you. Alrighty, let's go ahead and get going with the airspace stuff so we don't take up too much of the night here. So next year we're going to talk about National Airspace System, okay? This is probably one of the hardest parts for private pilots, new pilots to really kind of get a grasp on. So I'll show you a couple of tricks that have helped me and my students really kind of understand how airspace works in the VFR weather minimums and stuff like that. So this is task E, as you can see over here. This is task E in the private pilot PTS. So we went from the very beginning to E. So we skipped a couple steps, but that way here we can kind of get the tougher stuff out of the way up front and make this free webinar more worth your time rather than just some common sense stuff. So this is going to get pretty technical here. And so with any questions, remember, please ask any questions that you have, because I don't want you to be confused. If I'm not saying something right or if it's not making sense, I don't want you to be confused. I want you to just ask, and I'll do my best to explain it, okay? So here we go. Airspace. What we're going to cover in this PowerPoint is basic VFR weather minimums for all classes of airspace. We're going to cover airspace classes, the rules, the pilot certifications, and the necessary airplane equipment to enter into those airspaces, and special use airspace. So before we jump into it, let's talk about VFR. Let's talk about what VFR stands for. Okay, VFR stands for Visual Flight Rules. Okay, so if you want to go flying around, just by yourself or whatever, or having fun, and you don't really want to be told what to do by ATC all the time, then you need to be on what's called a VFR flight plan, or you're just out flying VFR, okay? Now, if weather gets to a certain point, starts to get bad and visibility starts to get clouds or maybe storms or something around, then you're not able to fly VFR anymore. You actually have to fly what's called IFR. And IFR stands for Instrument Flight Rules, okay? So IFR, the Instrument Flight Rules, means the ATC pretty much has control over everything that you do. You don't really have, you do have a say, but ATC is going to control your altitude, your headings, where you can go, how fast you can go, all of that kind of stuff, okay? The reason for that is if the weather gets bad, and you're flying in the clouds or really poor visibility, ATC steps in and takes over all those operations to keep you from hitting another airplane, okay? Because if you're flying in the clouds, you're not going to be able to see other airplanes, all right? So we're just going to focus on VFR stuff today, meaning VFR pretty much means it's a nice clear day outside. You can avoid the clouds, and you're not flying in very low visibility or storms and stuff like that, okay? So we're going to talk about what the weather needs to be in order for you to be able to operate under visual flight rules. Operate VFR, just kind of do what you want, okay? Not be overshot by ATC the entire time, okay? So the first type of airspace that we have, airspaces are Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, and Golf, okay? Those are the different types of airspace. So we're going to go through every one of them, and we're going to start with Class Alpha airspace. Now, like I said, I'm going to send these PowerPoint slides to you following the presentation so that you have all these things. But if you are taking notes on your own, what I would do is I would kind of make a graph of some sort where you've got the different types of airspaces up top, like A, B, C, D, E, and G up top. And then down along the side of the graph, you're going to want to have these things that I have in bold here. You're going to want to have dimensions, entry requirements, and VFR weather minimums, okay? So for every class of airspace, you need to know these three things. You need to know what their dimensions are, what you need to do to get in and out of that airspace, and what the VFR weather minimums are. All right? So here we go. Class Alpha airspace. The dimensions, okay? It's the airspace from 18,000 feet above sea level up to and including 60,000 feet above sea level, covering the entire 48 contiguous United States and Alaska. So just think of it as like it's the big blanket over the entire United States, okay? From 18,000 feet and up, pretty much, is Class Alpha airspace. Okay, so that's for entry requirements. In Class Alpha airspace, all operations have to be under instrument flight rules. So there is no, you can't just go up above 18,000 feet and fly around and kind of do what you want. Okay, you have to be on you have to have an ATC clearance, and you have to be flying under instrument flight rules. You can't be flying visual flight rules in this type of airspace. Okay, so you got to be under IFR with an ATC clearance. The second thing that you need for Class Alpha airspace is a two-way radio communications. So you're talking with ATC the whole time, essentially is what that means. Okay, if you don't have a radio in your airplane, well, you probably shouldn't be flying anyways, but you definitely cannot be flying in Class Alpha airspace. So you have to have two-way radio communications the whole time you're in Class Alpha airspace. The third thing is you have to have what's called a Mode C transponder installed in your airplane. Okay. Now, Mode C transponder, it's a little black box in your airplane, and it tells ATC where you are and how high you are. Okay. It's going to give ATC your lateral position and your vertical position, so your altitude. All right. Now that has to be in the plane and working, so the ATC can keep you away from other airplanes. Okay, so if you want to go into Class Alpha airspace, you've got to have a Mode C transponder. You've got to have that little black box in your airplane that tells ATC where you are and what altitude you're flying around at. All right, and the last thing for Class Alpha airspace is the VFR weather minimums. It's not applicable because there is no VFR flying in Class Alpha airspace. So everything is conducted under IFR instrument flight rules. So there are no VFR weather minimums in Class Alpha airspace. Okay. All right, let's move on to the next one. B is Bravo, Class Bravo airspace. Okay. We're gonna start with dimensions, entry requirements, and VFR weather minimums. But before we get into it, think of B as like big airports. Okay. These are your international airports. These are big airports. So the only one here in Utah by me is Salt Lake International Airport. But in California, they've got Los Angeles International, San Francisco. You've got Phoenix, Miami, Chicago, Midway, JFK. All of these different airports are what are called Class Bravo airports. Okay, they're very big airports, very busy, lots of airline traffic in and out. So the dimensions are customizable. Okay, so they can essentially make this airspace look however they want. They can make it go as high as they want, as low as they want, and then there's different shelves to this airspace. But essentially you want to think of it as like an upside down wedding cake. Okay, you can see this picture in the top right corner up here, how the wedding cake is upside down. That's typically what they look like. Okay, that's what a Class Bravo is usually going to look like. But remember, it's customizable, so they can make that cake look however they want. There's not like one cake fits all, right? They can make that cake look however they want. So entry requirements for Class Bravo airspace are you either have to have a private pilot license already, or you have to get a special sign-off from your flight instructor saying you can go into that Class Bravo airspace. Okay, so here in Salt Lake, if I wanted my student to go into Salt Lake's International's airspace, I would have to sign a spot in his logbook saying he's good to go into Salt Lake Bravo airspace. Now, a lot of people don't really do that. I mean, you can if you want to. I've never really done that. I just kind of have my students avoid Class Bravo when they don't have their private pilot license. So, but yeah, you have to have a private pilot license if you want to go flying around in there. Okay. The second thing is that you have to receive clearance. Okay. They have to say these words to you. They have to say cleared into Class Bravo airspace. Okay, they've got to say your tail number and that you're cleared into Class Bravo airspace. If they don't say that, you can't go in. Okay, I have students, they get confused all the time. We'll call up Salt Lake. We'll call up Salt Lake Tower, Salt Lake Approach, or whoever, and we'll say Salt Lake Approach Skyhawk 736 Tango Bravo. We'd like to transition your airspace to the south, something like that. And Salt Lake will come back to us and they'll say, okay, Skyhawk 736 Tango Bravo, descend and maintain 6,000 feet. Okay, so they told us to descend and maintain 6,000 feet or something like that. So we descend down to 6,000 feet. And a lot of times we'll think, okay, I'm good to go into Bravo airspace now because they talked to me. They told me to descend and maintain 6,000 feet. But you're not. You're not cleared into Class Bravo airspace unless they say the magic words, cleared into Class Bravo airspace. They have to say that. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. There's no way around it. Okay, they have to say cleared into Class Bravo airspace, or you'll get in big trouble if you go in. Okay. Okay, so the third thing is two-way radio communications. Obviously, that's how you heard that you were cleared in the Class Bravo airspace. And the last thing is the Mode C transponder. So that Mode C transponder, you need it in Alpha, and you also need it in Class Bravo airspace. All right. For the VFR weather minimums, you've got to have 3 statute miles of flight visibility and be able to stay clear of clouds. Okay, so you have to be able to, when you're looking out the window, you've got to be able to see 3 miles out of your airplane window, and you've got to be able to maneuver to stay clear of clouds. Okay, if you can't, say you're looking outside the window and you determine you can only see like a half mile or you're a mile or something, or say you're flying through Class Bravo airspace and you realize you can't stay clear of clouds, well then you can't go flying in there. You can't go flying into that Class Bravo airspace on a VFR flight plan. You'd have to get an instrument flight plan clearance to go into Class Bravo airspace. Okay, so that's what it means. Flight visibility, you got to have 3 miles, and cloud clearance, you have to be able to stay clear of clouds. So after Bravo, we've got Class Charlie airspace. Okay, same thing. It kind of looks like an upside down wedding cake, but this one's only got 2 tiers. Okay, Bravo can have a lot of tiers. You know, it's a rich man's wedding cake. Class Charlie is the poor girl's wedding cake. Okay, so it's just got 2 tiers here. So what it is the dimensions are customizable. Okay, just like Bravos are, and they can make it however they want. Generally in the shape of an upside down wedding cake. Now, think of C airspace or Charlie airspace as congested airports. Okay, it's always based around a congested airport. Now, not necessarily a big airport like Los Angeles International or San Francisco or something like that, but a bigger airport. You know, there might still be a little bit of airline traffic, not a ton. You know, it's not really like an airline hub or anything like that. But it's bigger than your normal airport. Okay, it's a little bit more busy than just your podunk airport kind of thing. Okay. So the entry requirements for Class Charlie airspace are 2-way radio communications and a Mode C transponder. Okay. Now, notice it doesn't say here that you have to have clearance to get into Class Charlie airspace. Okay. So if you're talking to, for instance, the Class Charlie airspace that's close to where I'm at is Boise, Idaho. That's really the only one that's kind of close to my home airport here. And so Boise is the Class Charlie airspace, and they don't, if you were to call up Boise Tower, they don't necessarily have to tell you that you are cleared into their airspace. Okay, they don't have to say Skyhawk 7316 Bravo, you were cleared into the Class Charlie airspace. They don't necessarily have to say that. But what they do have to do is they have to establish 2-way radio communications. Okay, what that means is that you call them up for something and they respond back to you with your tail number. Okay, they have to say your tail number. So say I call them up and I say, Skyhawk, Boise Tower, Skyhawk 7316 Bravo, we'd like to come in for a full stop. Something simple, okay? And then Boise comes back to me and they say, Roger, Skyhawk 7316 Bravo, you know, you're cleared to land runway 16 or something. But as long as they say my tail number, I can go into that airspace. Okay. Now, so the way that they do this, if they want to keep you out of their airspace, is they'll say something like, Skyhawk calling Boise Tower, stand by. Okay, if they say something like that, they didn't say my tail number, my specific tail number for the airplane, so I can't go in. Okay, and they'll do that on purpose. They know how the radio communications work. So if they don't want you to come into their airspace, they'll just say, Skyhawk calling Boise Tower, stand by. Okay, that way I don't have clearance, so I can't go in. Okay, I didn't establish 2-way radio communication, so I can't go in. But as soon as they say my tail number, I'm good to go. Okay. So also, before we move on to the VFR weather minimums, on this picture up here, you can see, like I said, the dimensions of Class Charlie are customizable, but this is kind of like the base plan for Charlie airspace, and then they can kind of change it from that. So there's usually a 5 nautical mile inner ring right here from the airport that goes from the surface to 1,200 feet MSL, or sorry, that should be AGL, 1,200 feet AGL. And then there's usually a 10 nautical mile outer ring, a bigger ring, that goes from 1,200 feet AGL to 4,000 feet AGL. So that's typically what they look like. But like I said, they're all different, and ATC can make them look, the FAA change their dimensions to look however they want them to look. Okay. So moving on to VFR weather minimums for Class Charlie airspace. So if I want to operate under visual flight rules, then I have to have at least 3 statute miles of visibility. I've got to be able to stay 1,000 feet above clouds, 2,000 feet horizontal from clouds, and at least 500 feet below clouds in order to operate under visual flight rules in Class Charlie airspace. Okay, so it's the 3-1-5-2 rule. 3 miles of visibility, 1,000 above, 2,000 horizontal, and 500 below. Okay. All right, let's move on now to Class Delta airspace. Class Delta airspace typically will look like this. It's usually got a radius of 4 nautical miles. Okay, from the airport out 4 nautical miles, and that's a radius, not a circumference. So 4 nautical miles. It usually goes from the surface up to 2,500 feet AGL. So 2,500 feet AGL means above ground level. So it starts from the ground and it goes up to 2,500 feet above the ground. Okay. They're also customizable. They can make them smaller or whatever, but they're generally in just the shape of a cylinder, not like an upside down wedding cake like the Charlie and Bravo airspace. They're usually just in kind of one cylinder cone type shape. All right, the entry requirements for Class Delta airspace are just two-way radio communications. All right, we already talked about how to establish that. They've just got to say your tail number. Okay, they say your tail number, you can go in. Okay, notice that you don't need a Mode C transponder to fly into Delta airspace. Okay, there's no Mode C transponder necessarily that you need here. VFR weather minimums for Class Delta are the exact same as the VFR weather minimums for Class Charlie. So the ones that we saw here in Charlie, down here, they're the exact same as the ones that we have for Delta airspace, right down here. Okay, 3 statute miles of visibility, 1,000 feet above clouds, 2,000 feet horizontal from clouds, and 500 feet below clouds. All right, Class Echo airspace. So think of E, or Echo, as everything else, okay? So this is everything else that's controlled airspace. So that's the other thing I want to go back and tell you. Class Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, and Echo are all what are called controlled airspace, or ATC controls what happens in that airspace, okay? So dimensions of Class Echo are pretty much everything else. So if it's not Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, it's probably Echo, okay? It's not actually everything else because we still have one more to talk about, which is golf, but for the most part, it's almost everything else, okay? So if you're not flying around near an airport, you're probably in Class Echo airspace, kind of depending on your altitude, but let's get into it here. So dimensions, everything else, okay? Entry requirements. So if it's a VFR day, if it's a nice clear day, you know, there's not poor visibility or low clouds or anything like that, then you can just go in. You don't have to talk to anybody. You don't have to ask clearance from anybody. You can just go right into Class Echo airspace. Don't have to even have a radio if you don't want one, okay? Which is obviously not a good idea, but you don't need to talk to anybody to go into Class Echo airspace. All right, the VFR weather minimums here start to get a little bit trickier. So if we're flying around below 10,000 feet above sea level, or if we're flying around above 10,000 feet above sea level, there's two different categories here, okay? So if we're below 10,000 feet above sea level, then our VFR weather minimums are 3 statute miles of visibility, 1,000 feet above clouds, 2,000 feet horizontal, and 500 feet below. Okay, same as Delta and Charlie. All right, if we go above 10,000 feet MSL, though, then we have different VFR weather minimums. We have a flight visibility of 5 miles now. Cloud clearance, I've got to stay 1,000 feet above clouds, 1,000 feet below clouds, and 1 statute mile horizontal from clouds now. Okay. The reason they do this, the reason there's a difference between below 10,000 feet and above 10,000 feet is because at 10,000 feet, there's a speed limit change. Okay. So any aircraft operating below 10,000 feet above sea level have to be at 250 knots indicated airspeed or less. Okay. So like 250, it's not really miles per hour, but yeah, 250 knots or less below 10,000 feet. Okay. However, once you get above 10,000 feet, then that airspeed limit goes away. So airplanes are traveling a lot faster above 10,000 feet, especially these airliners and these, you know, faster jets. So that's why you have to have a larger flight visibility and you have to stay further away from clouds above 10,000 feet because the planes up there are moving a lot quicker. Okay. All right, last one, class Golf airspace. Now this one is the trickiest, okay? There's all kinds of weird rules and caveats, but class Golf airspace is uncontrolled airspace, okay? So ATC does not control what happens in this airspace, okay? This pilots essentially can kind of do whatever they want. Yeah, I mean, there's other rules that they have to obey, but ATC doesn't control airplanes that are flying around in class Golf airspace, okay? So that's why it's called uncontrolled airspace. So obviously entry requirements are none because ATC is not even there. And the VFR weather minimums is where class Golf airspace gets tricky, okay? So I'm going to break it down into 3 different categories. We've got 1,200 feet above the ground or less during the day and at night. Then we're going to talk about 1,200 feet above the ground to 10,000 feet above sea level during the day and at night. And then we're going to talk about what we have to do above 10,000 feet above sea level during the day and the night, okay? So the first one, 1,200 feet above the ground or less. So we just took off from the airport and we're not even higher than 1,200 feet above the ground, okay? So we're nice and low. We're not 1,200 feet above the ground. During the daytime, we have to have a flight visibility of 1 mile, and we have to be able to stay clear of clouds. Okay, that's all you need during the day. 1 mile of visibility and stay clear of clouds. Now, if we're below 1,200 feet AGL at night, now we have to have a visibility of 3 statute miles, and our cloud clearance is the 125 rule, the 1,000 above, 2,000 feet horizontal, and 500 feet below clouds. Okay. Then we're going to jump down here to the next category. So our next section of air is from 1,200 AGL to 10,000 feet MSL, or 10,000 feet above sea level, okay? If we're in that altitude range during the day, then our visibility has to be 1 statute mile, and the clouds is the 125 rule. So 1,000 above, 2,000 horizontal, 500 below. At night, in that same altitude range, 1,200 AGL to 10,000 MSL, at night we have to have a visibility of 3 statute miles, and the clouds are a 125 rule. So 1,000 above, 2,000 horizontal, 500 below. All right, then our last altitude category is from 10,000 feet MSL and above. Okay, so if we're in class Golf airspace above 10,000 feet MSL, then our flight visibility has to be 5 statute miles, and we have to be 1,000 feet above clouds, 1,000 feet below clouds, and 1 mile horizontal from clouds. Okay, and that's actually the same whether it's day or nighttime. So if you're above 10,000 feet, it's the 5-1-1-1 rule. All right, so that's like, I mean, that's a mouthful. From all these different airspaces to remember all these different VFR weather minimums is tough. And that's kind of why it's sort of the hardest part of the private pilot syllabus. And it's, I mean, it's hard for everybody. It really is. In the airlines, I knew, you know, captains and people that had forgotten a lot of this kind of stuff. So it is a hard thing to kind of commit to memory, but you do have to do it to pass, you know, your private pilot check rides and stuff. So you do have to know all these things. Okay, you have to know weather minimums for Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, and Echo, and Golf. All 5 of them. Sorry, all 6 of them. Okay, so what I've done is I learned this little airspace triangle from one of my flight instructors, and so I've been sharing it with a lot of my students as well, and it seems to help. So I'm going to go ahead and show you guys this video of what I call the airspace triangle, and if it helps you remember the VFR weather minimums, then cool, you can use it. If not, then just totally forget this video. If it confuses you in any way, then just totally forget it and ignore it, okay? But I figured I'd show it to you just to see if, you know, if it'll help. So I'm going to go ahead and make it full screen, and I'm going to kind of pause it and go through. I'm not really going to pause. I'm just going to let the video run, and then I'll talk about it a little bit more afterwards. Short. Today we're going to explain the base triangle. It's just an easy trick to help remember VFR weather minimums for different types of airspace. So first we're going to draw our triangle, and then what you're going to have to draw is an upside down triangle within the bigger triangle. The top line of this upside down triangle is going to represent 10,000 feet MSL for us. So there's our space above and below 10,000 feet MSL. Above 10,000 feet, we have echo and Gulf airspace. And the VFR weather minimums are 5 statute miles of visibility, 1,000 feet above clouds, 1,000 feet below clouds, and 1 mile horizontal. Below 10,000 feet, we have Charlie, Delta, and Echo airspace, and their weather minimums are 3,152. So left of Charlie, Delta, and Echo, we have Gulf at night. So our Gulf airspace at night, the VFR weather minimums are 3,152. 3 statute miles of visibility, 1,000 above, 500 below, and 2,000 feet horizontal. Then we've got Gulf airspace during the day. VFR weather minimums are 1,152, 1 statute mile of visibility. Then there's also a little caveat for Gulf airspace during the day below 1,200 feet AGL. So this line here is going to represent 1,200 feet AGL. And that is 1 statute mile of visibility, and you just have to stay clear of clouds. So the last part of our triangle here is the Bravo for Bravo airspace. And the VFR weather minimums for Bravo airspace are 3 statute miles of visibility and clear of clouds. So it's just a little helper. If it helps you remember airspace, that's great. If not, you can remember it your own way. Okay, so that was the airspace triangle. I've seen it help, quite a few of my students to understand airspace, to kind of categorize that and memorize all those different minimums. Like I said, if it helps you, you can use it. If not, that's fine. The other thing is you guys don't have to memorize all this stuff necessarily right now. I'm going to be sending the PowerPoints to you, so all these links will be in here and they'll all work. And all the videos I've shown you today are on our YouTube page as well. So if you go to YouTube and you type in Axiom Aviation, AXIOM, like you see down here in the bottom right corner, type in Axiom Aviation, all these videos are posted on our YouTube channel. So you can go back to the YouTube channel and watch them, as much as you want to really start to understand the airspace triangle, or whatever videos we have posted there. I think now we've got like 18 or something like that, 18 little like helper videos. So you can go to our YouTube channel and watch those whenever you'd like. The last thing here, the very last slide on our airspace, is special use airspace. Okay, so this is the special stuff. So this isn't your typical airspace. Every once in a while they've got to put up special use airspace somewhere to protect certain activities. Okay, so these are the different kinds of special airspaces. There's prohibited airspace, which means flight through that airspace is completely prohibited. Okay, you cannot go through that airspace. So, for instance, the White House in Washington, D.C., okay, that's prohibited airspace. You cannot go flying through that any time of the day, whenever. You cannot go through there, okay? It's prohibited, all right? The next one is restricted airspace. So, in restricted airspace, flight is restricted, but permission may be granted from the controlling authority. So, there's a lot of restricted airspace across the country, and you can't just go flying into restricted airspace without permission, okay? But if you call up the right ATC facility, you can ask them for permission, and they can grant it to you. They can either say yes or no. Now, a lot of times people are like scared to ask for permission to go through restricted airspace. The worst thing they could say is no. Restricted airspace is busy today, so we can't let you go through there. But sometimes they'll say yes. Sometimes they'll say, yeah, sure, you can go through restricted airspace. We don't care. So I would say when I've asked to go through restricted airspace, it's been like 50-50. About half the time they'll tell me you're good to go through, and I can take a shortcut to get to my destination. And about 50% of the time they'll tell me no, it's closed today because it's too busy. So it doesn't hurt to ask. If you're ever close to restricted airspace or something, just call up the right ATC facility and ask them, say, hey, can I go through this airspace? And they'll tell you yes or no. All right. The next one is warning areas. So warning areas are from 12 nautical miles outward from the coast. Okay. They're there to warn non-participating aircraft of potential danger. All right. So if you just decide you want to come flying over from Europe or Mexico or wherever, these warning areas, you want to be talking to somebody in the United States, some ATC facility in the United States to, get clearance to go through. So they're there to just kind of warn non-participating aircraft of potential danger. The next one is the MOAs, the military operating areas. Okay. So this is where military operations are conducted. All right. So you're going to have, that's where the military's out. They can be running their drills and stuff out there and whatnot. Now, contrary to popular belief, no clearance is actually needed to fly through a military operating area. Okay, a lot of people would think that you do need a clearance to fly through an MOA, but you don't. You can actually just fly through there and not talk to anybody if you didn't want to. Okay, you won't get in trouble. However, it is probably smart to call up somebody and say, hey, we're going to be coming through this airspace. Is there anything we need to be aware of? And they can tell you, yeah, we're doing military operations to the north or to the west or whatever. They'll tell you. Obviously, it's always safer to call up and ask, or you don't really even have to ask, but just to call up and tell them that you're coming through if you're going to. But like I said, if you don't, you're not in trouble. Everything's okay. All right, you don't need clearance to go through an MOA. Then we have alert areas. Now, these areas are not necessarily charted on like VFR sectionals, like maps and stuff like that. But they're just areas where there are high amounts of traffic or unusual aerial activity. So you'll see alert areas next to, smaller airports where there's a lot of flight training, maybe airports where they do a lot of skydive operations or hang gliding or gliders, ultralight activity, all that kind of stuff. So if there's an area where there's just, kind of weird, unusual traffic going on, or if it's really busy, then that's kind of like an alert area. Okay. Obviously, you don't need any clearance or anything to go through these areas. They're just trying to tell you, hey, there's a lot of skydiving or whatever is going on right here. There's gliding right here in this general area. So those are alert areas. And then the last one is the ones we already talked about, the TFRs, the temporary flight restrictions. Okay, so I shouldn't say ATC. The FAA can create these TFRs, where and when they need them. Like we talked about before, Obama, Disneyland, the Super Bowl, that's where you're going to find these different temporary flight restrictions. Okay, so that's it, guys. That's everything for the airspace. So we'll go back up to the top, make sure we got everything. We covered all the rules, pilot certifications, and necessary airplane equipment and special use airspace for Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Golf, the airspace triangle, if it helps, you can use it, and for special use airspace. So that's everything. You guys have, if you do have any questions, you can go ahead and type them up in the chat box, and I'll get to them before I end the webinar here. I did want to say, now a lot of people, you'll notice a lot of people will do these webinars and they'll give you this little free short stuff and then they'll try and give you a big sales pitch at the end. I'm not going to try and give you a big sales pitch. If you had a good time today and you felt like you learned some good stuff that's helpful to you, we will be running the whole entire rest of the PTS tomorrow from 10 a.m. tomorrow, 10 a.m. Central Time tomorrow until we're done. It usually goes till about 4 or 5 p.m. Central Time. You can click and sign up and join with us to go through the entire private pilot PTS. We only did 2 sections today, but there's a bunch of sections, so we'll go through the whole thing, the whole rest of it tomorrow. And since you guys came to this class with us, it's usually $200 to go through the entire PTS with us, but since you did this free introductory webinar with us, we just want to thank you by giving you $50 off. So for $149, we'll go through the entire rest of the private pilot PTS tomorrow, and that's if you sign up by tonight. So like I said, I don't want to make this a big sales pitch. I really just want to make it so that we help people to understand private pilot stuff and to pass their check rides and their written tests and be safe pilots. But yeah, so the rest of the PTS will be covered tomorrow. If you're able to come and if you had a good time, it's $149 for everything, guys. So I'm gonna go ahead and just type our email address into the chat box here. It's axaviation@gmail.com. And what you can say when you email us is just tell us that that you're interested in the full PTS course tomorrow, and we'll get you that $50 discount so you can save $50 and go through the rest of PTS with us. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off here. Well, I'm going to leave my computer up while I let you guys sign off. I'll probably leave the computer up here for another 5 to 10 minutes. Whatever questions that you have, just go ahead and type them into the chat box. Or like I said, if there's a question you don't want to ask in the chat box, you can just send us an email to that axaviation@gmail.com, and I'll answer it personally for you. So I'll leave this up for another 5 minutes to answer any questions, and if there are none, then you guys have a great night. Thanks for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow. Okay? Take care, guys.